Good morning, everyone. My name is André Løvestam. I have the pleasure to give you an investor presentation about Zwipe today. Just a very quick overview of what Zwipe is. This is our product. It is a so-called inlay that contains all the functionality that's needed in order to have a biometric payment card. This means that what we do is we take the convenience of contactless and we add the security of biometrics, replacing all needs for PIN codes or passwords or anything, and bypassing all the transaction limits that are otherwise in place. So this means that, for example, in Sweden, you could pay contactless both above and below the transaction limit of 200. Our business model is that we buy components from electronic suppliers, semiconductor suppliers, and the likes, and we produce our own proprietary inlay. This is sold to card manufacturers that laminate the cards, and then they sell them on to banks who issue them to consumers for use in the marketplace. And our charge is per unit. So, Zwipe is a first mover in this space. We have had industry-leading technology and been at the forefront of the development for many, many years. We launched the world's first pilot, and we are very much focused on the user experience. Consumers expect payment to be a frictionless process. That's why contactless has gained so much popularity. It's quick, it's fast, it's convenient. What we have also done is to develop a very convenient way of onboarding customers. That means that when they are registering their biometric data, their fingerprint data on the card, it can be done both in a bank branch or at home using our at-home enrollment solution. We see a very strong market momentum for biometric payment cards. All the big players are investing in this space. They are preparing for market takeoff. This means the large payment networks like Visa and MasterCard, and it also means the large card manufacturers like Gemalto and IDEMIA that are the world's largest players. In fact, we see all kinds of stakeholders all over the value chain preparing for market takeoff. So in our opinion, it is no longer a question whether biometric payment cards will come to the market. It's only a question of when and how fast the market will grow. And we are partnering with lots of leading players, such as Gemalto, our strategic partner, who is also the world's largest card manufacturer, producing about 1 billion payment cards per year. We also see a lot of upside potential besides the biometric payment card itself. First and foremost, in the space of wearables, which are becoming more and more popular, so that you could use, for example, your watch to do a contactless payment, and also digital authentication, which means that we can use our technology to authenticate the user also when buying online, for example, at Amazon.com. These are so-called card not present transactions, and also through licensing of IP. We have a very strong IP portfolio, and we'll get back to that soon. The biometric payment card space is picking up speed, as I mentioned. And in 2018, there were a total of 17 different pilots announced globally, of which 12 contained Zwipe technology. And we aim to see more pilots in 2019. In fact, the first pilot using our at-home enrollment solution is expected to start later this quarter. We also have a very strong, dedicated management team, which I'm very proud of, with complementary skill sets. I would like to particularly mention that we have strengthened this team following our IPO listing on the Oslo Stock Exchange in January this year, where we successfully completed a 120 million Norwegian kroner fundraising. And in addition to that, we also gained 23 million NOK grant from the EU, from the Horizon 2020 program. This has enabled us to strengthen our organization, and only recently we added Marcio Sturvid, our Chief Commercial Officer, who has more than 20 years of experience in all parts of the value chain in the financial industry. And very recently also Dr. Robert Müller, our new CTO, who has more than 25 years of experience with biometrics, algorithms, and smart cards. We also have a strong board. Here I would particularly like to mention our chairman, Jørgen Lanto, who of course has a lot of experience within the biometric space, semiconductor space, and he's also a very good sparring partner for me in my daily work. So let's go to what is really at the core of Zwipe, our technology. And our technology is also at the core of making convenience secure, which is our mission statement. Zwipe's technology enables batteryless, contactless, ultra-low power, self-contained biometric authentication in constrained environments. So batteryless, contactless means that when you place the card in the NFC field above the payment terminal, it will harvest energy, transforming radio signals into energy on the card. And ultra-low power means that, of course, when you do this, you need to operate with very, very low amounts of energy. And we have a power management system that enables extremely low power consumption on this card in order to run the authentication process. Self-contained means that the biometric data are stored on the card and nowhere else. And this, of course, is very important for privacy reasons. There is no biometric data in a central database which can easily be hacked, or, well, not easily, but if it is hacked, you know, you lose lots of biometric data. This is prohibited by having the card only, or by having the biometric data only on the card. We also have a very strong IP portfolio. I mentioned that. We have more than 30 patents covering energy harvesting, power management, our algorithms. All of our core functionalities are covered by patents. But in addition to that, we also have some industry-wide patents that are not really directly related to our technology. One of those is so-called post-placement of fingerprint sensors. And that is where the whole industry is going. FPC, fingerprint cards, has developed their own fingerprint sensor, which is particularly made for biometric payment cards, and it's based on post-placement. This means that the card is laminated first, then you drill a hole for the fingerprint sensor, and then you place the fingerprint sensor onto the card. And we have patented that solution, and that, of course, is an industry-wide application. On top of that, we also have another very important patent, which covers the communication with the payment terminal. Because the payment terminal is set up to do a transaction very quickly, because it's used to have contactless payments without authentication. With authentication, the payment terminal needs to slow down, and therefore it needs a so-called wait time extension command. And that command is something, that whole method is something we have also patented. First and foremost, as I mentioned, we are focused on the user experience. If there is no user experience, that really is very good news. If people can just use their cards as they normally do without having to learn any new procedures, that's the best possible user experience you can have. And that's exactly what we deliver. It's the convenience of contactless, which has made contactless so important. And what we're doing is just adding biometrics in order to add security to that. So, what is the problem that we're solving? As I mentioned, contactless is booming. In countries like Australia, the Czech Republic, Poland, etc., contactless now represents more than 90% of all the transactions in POS terminals. There are more than 20 countries in Europe now where contactless represents more than 50% of the transactions, and it's growing very fast. Even in the US, which has been far behind, contactless is now coming fast. The problem is, though, that consumers love the convenience of this, but they are not fully satisfied with the security around contactless. And this is also why you have the transaction limits, which in themselves is a nuisance. So according to studies that Fingerprint Cards has made last year by Kantar research, 38% of the respondents, 4,000 respondents, said that contactless does not feel secure. And actually 51% said that they are very or extremely concerned about fraud on contactless cards. And fraud itself represents somewhere between between 35 and 40 billion dollars per year on a global scale. And of course, this is a challenge when you have consumer concerns about use of contactless, because the global card expenditure is expected to reach 45 trillion US dollars globally by 2023. And the growth of card usage is actually driven to a very large extent by contactless payments. So obviously the financial industry has huge incentives to solve the problem of consumer concerns with contactless. And that's exactly where the biometric payment card comes in. We see biometric authentication growing fast across industries, across devices, and we think it will fast become a necessity for all kinds of devices, and especially for banking and payments, which handles money. In fact, there was research commissioned by Visa last year, done by AYTM Research, which showed the perceived security inherent in different types of authentication. At the bottom, you have no authentication, which of course is what we do when we pay contactless. And that is seen as very insecure by 2/3 of respondents, and a further 15% of respondents said it's insecure. Very few said that there is any security in this. Then you have signature, which is almost as bad. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have numeric PIN. So when you add a PIN code, that is seen as much more secure. But in a class of its own, biometrics come in. Let's see if I can zoom in. So you have a very high percentage of consumers, about 50%, who say that biometrics feels very secure, and then you have a further 40% who says that it is a secure method of payment. So it is absolutely in a class of its own, and that's why you have the best of both worlds, the convenience of contactless and the security of biometrics. And this addresses the needs of all the parts of the value chain, all the stakeholders. The consumers have a faster and safer transaction and peace of mind. The merchants have a much faster customer throughput, which of course is hugely important to drive revenue. Think about, kiosks and fast food chains where you need to get the customers through as fast as possible. This will increase transaction speed and revenue. Then you have the banks that will have stronger branding. They will enjoy the fraud reduction, but most importantly, they will offer a card to their customers that the customers will prefer because it's convenient and secure. And that's when you get the top of wallet effects. Everyone, usually people have favorite payment cards which they use most of the time. And the biometric payment card is very likely to be the top of wallet card. And for card networks like Visa and MasterCard, it's all about driving contactless. It's all about driving towards a cashless society. And also it's a method of actually meeting the new competition that's coming from Google and Samsung and Apple Pay. So let's have a look at the market potential here. What are we talking about? This slide shows the number of cards, EMV cards, that are being issued each year. This year, it's about 3.3 billion cards that's being issued. And for the first time this year, contactless, which is the dark part of the columns, are so-called dual interface cards, meaning that they are both contact-based, which is kind of the old way of doing it, putting the card into the payment terminal, and also contactless. The gray parts are the traditional contact-based cards. And as you can see, the growth of dual interface is very strong, and it's expected to take over completely within a couple of years. And this is driven also by industry mandates from Visa and MasterCard, who have said that all payment terminals must accept contactless by 2020. And there are also regulatory directives, for example, issued by EU, like GDPR and PSD2, which are very focused on privacy and security, that are also driving this development. So, then the question is, if contactless are taking over, what part of those contactless cards will be biometric? And there have been several studies around this. To the left here, you see the results of the bottom-up analysis that Edgar and Dunn and company has done in London, looking at the number of biometric payment cards that could potentially become reality in the marketplace. And just to pick up a few numbers, by 2023, their expectation is that the potential could reach up to 866 million such cards in circulation globally. And this will grow to 6.8 billion by 2027, according to their calculations. This is what they call the addressable market. So a fairly slow start and then an exponential growth, really. And then the question is, well, 6.8 billion cards, that sounds like a lot. It only represents 38% of the total number of payment cards that are expected to be in circulation globally in the market by 2027. So is 38% high or low? Well, what we did was we tried to find empirical benchmarks, and the best benchmark we could find was the penetration of contactless cards in the UK. After 10 years, from 2008 to 2018, they grew from 0 to 81%. And contactless cards required several things that biometric cards do not require. They required a change in consumer habits, which has to do with training, and they also required investments in the payment terminal infrastructure in order to allow the payment terminals to accept contactless payments. No investments are needed in the infrastructure in order to run biometric payment cards. They can work on all kinds of payment terminals that exist today. So we also have a very diversified and growing global customer base. As I mentioned, our strategic partner first focus is Gemalto, and we are working with them to finalize and certify our joint solution, hopefully this year, but of course this depends on when the market is ready. In addition to that, we're also working with several other card manufacturers. We have just recently added 2 very significant partners to our partner network. One of them is Tag Systems, which is a leading card manufacturer in North Europe. I suppose that many here will have payment cards from Tag Systems. And they are also a very leading supplier to European challenger banks, like, for example, Revolut and N26, etc. And these are banks that are typically very innovative and could very well be the ones that take lead on the commercialization of biometric payment cards. And the second one is Thomas Gregg & Sons de Brazil, which is one of the top card manufacturers in Latin America, and they also have activities globally. So this is also a very strategic new partner for us, and we have lots of expectations for good collaboration with these partners. I mentioned that we have developed a secure at-home enrollment solution. It works very easily by consumers receiving this kit in their home, and then they can do the enrollment just like you do an enrollment on a new mobile phone at home. And that, of course, is again a very convenient way of doing it. And the security is handled by a need to activate the card after enrollment, and that you can do either through online banking, or by calling the bank, or by using the PIN code on your first transaction, and then the card is activated. A few words on our technology. These are dummy photos. This is a real inlay, but the principle is clear. What we are doing in terms of our technology roadmap is to work very focused on cost reduction and simplification. Our current inlay at the moment, which is kind of pilot phase, meaning that we have volumes in the hundreds or the very low thousands, is around $22. When we do a cost reduction through a simplification of electronics, and in addition to that, of course, economies of scale, we have an ambition to reduce the cost down to around $11 by mid next year. The next step in our process is to transition from inlays to component supplies. So what we are working on is an ASIC that has all our functionality and energy harvesting, etc., where we have already come very far. We will tape it out later this year, and that will enable us to sell components, an ASIC plus an MCU, which is a microcontroller unit, which is loaded with our firmware, our algorithm, and then our cost will be in the $3 to $4 range. So we have a strong roadmap for a large cost reduction. And that we expect will enable the cost of a total card to get down to around $10 or less. And this compares to a traditional card costing somewhere between $2 and $4, depending on bells and whistles and all of that. And of course is a premium, but what we see is that there is great incentives in order to accept that cost, and there is great willingness to pay also among consumers. For example, Revolut has launched metal cards quite recently and have charged about $17 per month for those cards to consumers, and still they have been sold out. Finally, let me say a few words about the competitive scene. What we have listed here are the players that have kind of announced their presence in the market. They have done pilots. They are clearly out of the closet. But we also see that there are some other competitors coming in. In addition to our joint collaboration with Gemalto and other card manufacturers that I mentioned, we have a player called Kona I, a South Korean card manufacturer who has performed a pilot in the US in the first half of 2018. And then we have IDEMIA, who is the main competitor of Gemalto, who have two solutions. They have one solution with certain technology partners and another solution with other technology partners. And this actually illustrates a trend that we see, which is quite clear, and that's the trend of dual sourcing or multi-sourcing. We see that a lot of stakeholders in the value chain are focusing on dual sourcing in order to reduce risk and make sure that you have supplies from alternative suppliers. And that's one of the reasons that we see competition as very positive, because we know that alone, Zwipe will not be able to realize this market. In order to realize such a global market with such high value involved, we need to have competitors that can provide alternatives to the banking industry and the card manufacturing industry. On top of that, whenever there is competitive activity, that impacts the dynamics of the market, because if one bank starts doing pilots, other banks will start reacting to that. If one card manufacturer starts moving in the biometric payment card space, then other card manufacturers react to that as well. We have some medium-term financial aspirations. Our target, we currently have more or less, negligible revenue. We are in a way pre-revenue, but we are waiting for commercialization to take place fairly shortly when we have successfully done the certification process, which hopefully will happen later this year. And our expectation for the medium term, our aspiration, is that we will reach an annualized revenue of 125 million US dollars, which is about 1 billion Norwegian kroners, based on an annual sales of 20 to 40 million embedded systems for these types of cards. The price that we're looking at in the medium term, as I mentioned, was coming down to the $3 to $4 range, and our ambition is to be the number one player in this market space. So we have a 30% market share ambition for this space. And as you saw in previous slides, the potential is enormous. Finally, let me say that we don't only work on payment cards. We also already are partnering with Tappy Technologies in order to introduce biometric-enabled wearables as well on watches, etc. So in summary, we are a first mover. We are user experience focused. We see a very strong market momentum, and everybody is now kind of preparing for the market takeoff. And we see upside potential from other areas besides biometric payment cards. And this actually goes beyond wearables. It also goes to other industries like access control, getting access to your office buildings, etc., and also to government ID, like passports and driving licenses. And this is all kind of future roadmap for Zwipe. So with that, thank you for your attention, and then we open up for questions.
Thank you, André. Very, very exciting.
Yeah.
I'll give you one more argument. I ran the idea of your cards to my girlfriend, and she's very concerned about germs, yes, personal hygiene. She doesn't like to get a cold. And the first thing she thought of when she digested the idea of your card is she doesn't have to touch the keypad that the sleazy guy in front of her in the line used 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point, actually. there has been studies showing that one of the most dirty places you can ever imagine is actually the pad on the payment terminals. So it's a very good point.
You heard it before.
I have heard it before, but I only had 25 minutes, so yeah.
She's on me a lot about that.
Good.
Okay, so the technology, if I get my bank to give me a card with Zwipe on it, I teach the card my fingerprint.
Yes.
I hold it here and I use the wireless on the payment terminal.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's it. You can do that on any terminal, anywhere in the world, above and below the transaction limit. So if you have a credit limit which is high enough, you can buy a car just contactless with your payment card.
Okay. But then you don't need to change the infrastructure because the card will have to send the transaction as verified without the PIN code. That's in place already as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So what we're doing is we're using standard protocols for the contactless communication with the terminal. And all of the authentication is taking place on the card. And when the authentication is successful, the card will just communicate to the terminal that this is a so-called EMV, authorized and authenticated transaction. And that means that it tells the terminal to just run the transaction as if it has been authenticated in another way, for example, a PIN. The payment terminal doesn't know the difference between biometrics or PIN or anything. It just knows, is this an authorized and authenticated transaction? If yes, go.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. Talking about the market and the cost, and I know the early analysis in Sweden was they were afraid you were a race to the bottom price-wise. But is it also so that a bank could use your technology to private banking rich customers that they want to give a premium platinum card,
Right,
and don't use this expensive technology for the general public? Would that be possible?
Well, that's a very fair assumption. And that probably is why Edgar and Dunn, for example, said that even in 2027, only 37% of payment cards will have, potentially have biometric payment card functionality. So the expectation is that to start with, just like you said, private banking customers, high net worth and individuals, and also corporate cards will be the first segments where this will be launched. And then it will kind of move into the broader segments after a while.
Okay, so your sales job when it comes to that will be then to get a couple of card issuers, a couple of banks to use this, and then the competition will get this going.
Exactly. I mean, that's what it's all about. The starting gun is the certification, which is given by MasterCard and Visa. And after that, it's up to banks to roll out where they want. And we see interest actually all over the place, from Asia to the Middle East to Europe and to Latin America. And we are currently doing pilots, for example, with Intesa San Paulo, which is one of the world's global top 40 banks, and MasterCard. And we're doing 10 different pilots in the Middle East with different banks down there.
Okay. I'll run one more question, then we'll take questions from our audience. This is my top deck card. I have it here.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I cannot connect this to Apple Pay. They just said, tell your card issuer to contact us. That's what they say. But of course, when I can marry this with a phone, I will want to go like this. how much of an impact will the smartphones have in actually eliminating cards in years to come?
Well, actually, I've been a shareholder at Zwipe for many years, and I was worried about that some 3 years ago when there was a lot of hype around mobile payment. What's actually taken place over the last 3 years is that mobile payment has gained quite a lot of traction in China, but not really anywhere else. It is starting to pick up. I'm sure it will continue, but cards still are the preferred way of paying, and they are so convenient. And when you can now add security, cards is given a big boost. So my expectation is that cards will not really be very much impacted by the growth of mobile payment, because banks will want to give their consumers choice anyway. So they will all, you will still have cards when you start paying with your phone, and maybe you'll even have a wearable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's certainly cheaper than giving the private banking customer an iPhone.
For sure, for sure.
On that same theme, how long do you expect this to be the state-of-the-art technology? What's next? Will we see a new revolutionary technology in 10 years' time?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I wish I had the answer. I really don't. If I had, then we would probably start working on it. But for sure, we see that both card manufacturers and banks are saying that by adding biometrics to payment cards is the biggest and most important innovation in this space for years, if not decades. And the pace of innovation in payment cards has been fairly slow. There was first the magnetic stripe, then there was chip and pin coming around 20 years later. Now there's biometrics. And then, you could have different modalities of biometrics. People are talking a lot about other types of biometrics, for example, iris and these kind of things. The challenge is that when you have a payment card, it is very hard to use those modalities because you would need to have a machinery in order to do that. And that machinery costs a lot of money. And if you have machinery, you will need to have a central database for the biometric data as well. And this is all handled with a fingerprint card. So this is why I think this will be the state of the art for decades, to be honest.
My second question is your payment. Now you're paid once. Would it at all be possible to be paid by transaction? You get 0.0000 dollar cents per transaction.
Obviously. I love commercial engineering, and that's what you're talking about. And those kind of ideas could obviously be possible to discuss with banks and card manufacturers as well. Definitely. Well, currently the focus is very much on kind of getting the certification, and we are charging by unit, but who knows, maybe we can have those discussions.
Okay, so let's go back to your technology. I'm going to guess here, and you can correct me. There seems to be two core technologies with Zwipe, and one of them you buy from Swedish fingerprint cards, the fingerprint authentication engine. And the second one would be your energy harvesting, where you actually get enough power to the authentication from the terminal wirelessly in order to do the authentication. Is those two the key? And how do they what's their relative weight? Can fingerprint just do this by themselves tomorrow?
So to answer that last question first, no, they cannot. Fingerprint cards are focused on the fingerprint sensor, and they also have their solution for the biometric engine, which is the algorithm. But there are also several other alternatives for the biometric engine, the algorithm. Among them, we have an algorithm as well. The core technologies that we are providing are the energy harvesting and the power management system. Energy harvesting is all about how much energy you can get onto the card by harvesting. And power management is all about reducing the energy consumption that's needed in order to perform the functions that are on the card. We do not intend to buy fingerprint sensors from FPC directly, because their sensor is based on post-placement, like I mentioned. And that means that it will be the card manufacturers that actually buy the sensors from FPC. They buy our inlay, they laminate the card, they drill the hole in the top layer of the card, and then they post-place the sensor. So before, we used to actually add the sensor to the inlay, but now, as you see on this latest inlay, there is no sensor, because that will be post-placed. The good thing about post-placement, though, is that we have this patent, which has been granted in the US by the European Patent Office, in Singapore, in China, in South Korea, and in Australia. And it is granted all of these places, but has been challenged in the European Patent Office. So there is an appeal process ongoing in that geography.
Okay. Anyone want a brief last question to Zwipe and André? Daniel, varsågod.
So are you, NatWest yesterday announced that they are doing the first trial of biometric cards in UK. Are you providing technology to those guys?
I have received that question several times. Now, we have announced 12 pilots. And our communication policy is that we try to announce all the important events that are taking place with Zwipe. Unless we are prohibited from doing so, which happens from time to time. We can't announce a name, or we can't announce a partner, or whatever. And otherwise, we don't comment on third-party announcements. So unfortunately, I cannot comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zwipe. Thank you, André.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.